Students are the experts in their experiences. I would encourage students to be talking to fellow students, finding ways to articulate their experiences that they're having in school, what's working, what's not working for them.
Students and learners are the biggest advocates and should be. If we're going to talk about learner agency and we're going to talk about learner-centered approaches, students need to be driving all of that.
This is the Education Crisis, what it is and how to fix it. I'm your host, Tembi Duncan. This series features renowned education expert Dr. Charles Reigeluth, author of the book Vision and Action, Reinventing Schools Through Personalized Competency-Based Education. Together, we examine the crisis in American education, what has caused the crisis, what our schools need to be like to fix the crisis, how to successfully transform to that very different kind of school, and what you can do to help your schools to transform. Chapter 10. What can you do to transform education? Dr. Reigeluth, given the exciting nature of the personalized, competency-based paradigm of education and the guidance you offered for transforming schools to that paradigm, what can our listeners do to help this transformation happen in their local school or district?
Well, there are lots of things an individual can do, whether they're a school board member, superintendent, principal, teacher, parent, or even student. Let's start with a school board member. First, she or he should learn a bit more about the personalized competency-based paradigm. My book, Vision and Action, would be a good place to start. Then talk one-on-one with other board members about the new paradigm, beginning with why learning-based student progress is so much better than forcing students to move on before they've learned the material. Most of the other changes we've talked about are needed for learning-based student progress to work well. Talking one-on-one is much better than talking with the whole board. Some board members will be receptive, but others will struggle to understand because time-based student progress is all that they've experienced. It might help if they listen to this podcast series. Once a few board members have become interested in the new paradigm, they should get the board to appoint a study committee to explore the pros, cons, and options. Committee members should be carefully chosen from all stakeholder groups, with no more than about 10 members. They should visit schools that have transformed not only to find out what's worked well, but also to find out what challenges they faced in the transformation process and what they recommend for overcoming those challenges. The committee's report to the board should make specific recommendations for next steps, which should include sharing what they have learned with all stakeholders in community forums or meetings with each stakeholder group individually. The next step is to form a pre-launch team, as we discussed in Chapter 8 of this series, and continue the process we talked about there. Building interest and understanding among teachers is crucial.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But what if our listener is a superintendent?
Well, a superintendent should also begin by learning more about the new paradigm, then start talking one-on-one with board members about it and refer them to this podcast. When several are interested, they can ask the board to form a study committee, which would do the things I just described.
And what if our listener is a principal?
Yes, this gets more difficult because principals have less power and influence. Again, they should begin by learning more about the new paradigm. I don't recommend that principals begin by getting their teachers excited about the new paradigm, unless the school has the kind of independence we talked about in Chapter 9. This is because a transformed school is incompatible with the rest of the district, and hidden forces will constantly work to transform it back to the industrial age paradigm. But a principal might have a trusted colleague who could be a study partner for learning more about the new paradigm and could serve as a fellow advocate in meetings with the superintendent. So meeting with the superintendent is the next step. And if the principal can get the superintendent on board, the superintendent undertakes learning more, talks one-on-one with board members, and helps them to form a study committee.
I see. And if our listener is a teacher?
Well, the process is really pretty similar. Again, I don't recommend trying to go it alone in the classroom because that will be a frustrating uphill battle. The better approach is to get the principal on board. The teacher begins by learning more. They prepare by studying such books as Vision and Action and learning about schools that have already transformed. They also consider recruiting another teacher as a study partner and fellow advocate. Then the teachers meet with their principal to get her or him on board. If they succeed, then the principal can follow the process I just described to get the superintendent on board, and so on.
Okay, I see a pattern here. So I imagine it's even harder for a parent then.
Well, yes, parents do have less influence, but their effort does not necessarily have to be any greater. They need to start by learning more about the new paradigm, and recruiting a few other parents as study partners and fellow advocates is helpful. Then they have choice. They could approach a teacher or two who seem to be learner-centered, or they could go straight to the principal or assistant principal, depending on their comfort level with them, and depending on their impressions of the openness of that person to change and the learner-centeredness of that person. The Parent-Teacher Association may also be a good place to build understanding and support for the new paradigm.
Got it. Now, what about students? Is there anything they can do?
Yes, students have the most to benefit from the transformation, so they can be powerful advocates. Again, they should start by learning more about the new paradigm. Go online and look for schools that have transformed. I list some such schools in my Vision in Action book and its website. Students can talk to some of their friends about it and get them to be study partners and fellow advocates. They should try to go viral in their school and try to get their parents on board. They can then help their parents to use the process I just described to get the principal on board, and so forth.
So anybody can make a difference, no matter how little influence they have. That's great.
Yes, and even community members who have nothing to do with their schools can play a very powerful role. The health of a community depends on the quality of education in its schools. Many people recognize this and would like to see their schools improve. There are several things they can do. They can talk to friends and neighbors about it, try to get parents of students in the school to listen to it, see if anyone in their network knows any teachers or administrators in the schools and can get them to listen to it. Also, any educators who are interested in paradigm change would love to have community members' support. Finally, if they are a member of a church or a civic group, they can talk to people there about the need for paradigm change and share this podcast series with them. Just sharing this with lots of people could make a big difference.
That's a good point. Perhaps one of the best things a listener can do is share this podcast series with as many people as they can.
Yes, that is a good first step to learning more about the learner-centered paradigm and generating sufficient interest to really make a difference. We need to improve the lives of our children and future generations and to strengthen America. That will only happen if you, our listeners, understand that our educational system is in crisis and needs to transform to the personalized, competency-based paradigm. You can and must help make this happen.
We spoke with Jeff Wetzler, co-founder and board member of Transcend Education, a nonprofit organization that operates nationally to help schools and districts transform to the personalized, competency-based paradigm of education. Jeff, based on your experience helping school districts to transform, if a listener is a school board member in a traditional district, what could that person do to help get a transformation process going?
This is in many ways why we wrote our book called Extraordinary Learning for All, to equip people in seats of leadership, whether they're school boards or system leaders, with a little bit of a playbook for what to do. So maybe one of the single most important things I would say is start by listening to your learners. Go shadow your students, go interview them, not for 5 minutes, but for 30 or 45 minutes. Ask them about the experiences that they're having. You can't unhear what they'll tell you. They know what they want. As I said, they're experts in their experiences. And so if your district has not done a serious listening project with learners, I would start there. We also have a student voice survey that helps us to measure the experiences that learners are having on the dimensions that matter most for 21st century learning. Things like, are they feeling like they're in charge of their learning? Does it feel relevant, etc.? Where's the world going? What are the trends? Where is technology going? Where are jobs going? Where is the climate going? What kinds of graduates do we need to produce? What do they need to be able to do? How do they need to be able to think? And to what extent are we producing graduates with that profile right now? And then the third thing I would just say is start to consider community-based design journey. Learn about what it would look like to come together and rethink the design of school. That doesn't mean you have to build everything from scratch. There's a lot of pre-existing models that can be borrowed from and taken inspiration from and adapted into your context. But it's better to do that in the context of a design journey versus just saying, we're going to take on this or that, because you'll build the conditions and you'll make sure it actually is cohesive in your system.
And is there anything different that a superintendent in a similar situation should do to try to generate interest in transforming the district?
All the same things I said for boards apply. The thing I would add for superintendents is to cultivate their own leadership, because the superintendent is never going to be the one that's going to teach the classes, write the curriculum, maybe even design the school. The special role that the superintendent has is to create the conditions for transformation in their system, with the conditions I was talking about earlier in the conversation. And to do that requires a very different kind of leadership than the industrial model of schooling demanded of leaders, of system leaders and administrators. That's the leadership that we call learner-centered leadership. And so I would be digging into what is learner-centered leadership. We have a chapter about that in our book, but we also have a program for superintendents called the Learner-Centered Leadership Lab, where superintendents who want to initiate this kind of transformation in their system can come together with other visionary superintendents, learn about this different type of leadership, and do the work on themselves, and then ultimately many of them bring this into their own systems to help their teams do this kind of work in order to ready themselves to lead change like this.
Interesting. And are there different things that a principal ought to do to kickstart the transformation process?
I mean, I think everything I said about listening to learners would absolutely apply, looking at where the future is going. So I think all these different things would apply. I think for a principal, they also need to understand what is their latitude to do things. In some cases, they may have that latitude, in which case they can try some new stuff at their school. They can encourage pilots, maybe even a full design journey. For other principals, they may need to enlist their principal manager or their superintendent in the need for this as well. And so there's an advocacy component for principals to be doing this kind of thing too.
And what about teachers?
I would say back to the same thing for teachers. Start by listening to your learners, co-design with them, try to be adjusting your practice to be giving learners more and more agency. Increase your expectations of what they can be able to handle in terms of responsibility, guiding their own learning, navigating technology, all those different kinds of things as well. Advocate to your principal. There's only so much that an individual teacher can do in their classroom if it's going against the grain of the way the school is designed. And so also be an advocate for thinking differently about school design.
Well, what if a student was listening to this podcast and thought, okay, I want to try to do something like this in my school district?
I love it. I think students, as I said, students are the experts in their experiences. The act of advocating for this is an act of agency and leadership in the first place. I would encourage students to be talking to fellow students, finding ways to articulate their experiences that they're having in school, what's working, what's not working for them. Look around at what else is possible. On our website, we have something called the Models Exchange, where students or teachers or principals or superintendents can see the range of different innovative models that are out there. Start to be familiar with those and say, what if we tried this? What if we tried that as well? I'm also a fan of how might we equip students with the knowledge of how learning works. What would it mean to put that knowledge in the hands of students as well? How does my brain work? How do I learn things? How do I motivate myself? All of that kind of stuff. And I think if students can hold that knowledge, they can start to become the drivers that are learning that I believe the AI age is going to demand of them.
It sounds like your book might be a valuable resource to many of our listeners.
Yeah. So the book is called Extraordinary Learning for All. And the subtitle is How Communities Design Schools Where Everyone Thrives. And it's built on the last decade of insights that our organization Transcend has had in working with hundreds of schools and systems across the country of all different sizes and types, from urban to rural to suburban, from districts to charters, etc. And it really tries to codify the lessons that we have learned about what works in this reimagining, redesign, transformation process. And we try to not just provide theory and frameworks, but actual concrete stories So we tell the story of 4 different communities who've gone through this journey and what that's looked like for them. Each community has its own chapter. We talk about the phases and stages and methods and activities that we were talking about earlier. We have a chapter specifically on what does it mean for leadership. We have a chapter specifically on what does it mean for the policy changes that you might need to advocate for as well. So it's very much written for practitioners. It's co-authored by myself and my co-founder of Transcend, who's now Transcend CEO, Elon Samoa, and also Janae Henry Wood, our Chief Learning Officer. But really, it's the product of the work of our entire team at Transcend. And the hero of the book are the communities that are doing this work. We are simply their partners and storytellers. But really, the people at the center are the communities who are doing, I think, very brave and heroic work.
Can you talk about how important you think it is for school districts to transform?
I think if you are running a school district where someone going to school today would have roughly the same experience as their parents or their grandparents, it is urgent and imperative that you transform, update, modernize, not for the sake of change for its own sake, but because the world is radically different. What skills and opportunities are today and tomorrow are very different than they were 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. And the next 2 to 3 years, I think, are going to see a level of change that is none of us have ever seen in our lifetime. And so we don't even know exactly what school needs to look like, but your system needs to have the muscle to continue to change and adapt as times change very quickly. So I think it's imperative to do it. That's why we founded Transcend as an organization.
Thank you, Jeff. You've helped us understand how different stakeholders can ignite the transformation process. Now let's hear from Scott Fronheim at Leap Innovations, a Chicago-based nonprofit that helps schools and districts transform to the personalized, competency-based educational paradigm. Scott, I'd like your thoughts on what your listeners can do to start a transformation process in their school or their district. Let's say a school board member was listening to this podcast and decided to get something like this started in their district. What would you recommend?
So I would encourage that lone school board member to be a strong advocate for the district leaders and be a partner to that superintendent. Even if you're worried about the readiness of other board members, the power of having even a single board member rally around a superintendent is really powerful.
What about a superintendent? What should they do?
Yeah, I'd recommend that they are really intentional about building their advocacy around them for the why, looking at student data, listening to stakeholders and already created, advocacy groups within the district and getting some of that shared purpose and culture around them before bringing this to the board or looking for partners like us to come back in and do the work with them. I think once you have that base of supporters, it makes it a little bit more exciting for everyone to be part of, but also builds the consensus that, you've got a system that's ready to do this. When you bring in your board around to the idea of an investment around some of these strategies for transformation, having some sort of consensus built on the why and the what really helps the superintendent, I think, go faster in the early stages here.
Now, what can a principal in a traditional school district do to initiate paradigm change?
Principals are, in my mind, the major levers of change for a system and for a district. And so principal advocacy for change in a building can really transform a district in a positive way if done well. And so I encourage principals to find their advocacy voices in partnership with their district leadership and their superintendents to be able to, advocate for what change they believe is necessary at the local context based on their own community, based on their own needs, based on their own data sets.
If a listener is a teacher in a traditional school district, can they do something?
I encourage teachers constantly to lift ideas and to bring ideas to their principals and, to their district leadership. I think teachers getting involved in a lot of our professional development opportunities is really important to help inform their own practice and inform their own ideas. That helps them then go back and inform in maybe in stronger ways and in more quantitative ways what they could be bringing back to their principal or their district to show outcomes and to show evidence of their idea or of their implementation.
How about students? Can they do something in a traditional system?
At Leap Innovations, we say when students talk, everyone must listen. Students and learners are the biggest advocates and should be if we're going to talk about learner agency and we're going to talk about learner-centered approaches. Students need to be driving all of that. And so I just encourage learners to continue speaking up, to continue to have their voices heard, and demand in their schools or in their districts that there's mechanisms and avenues for student voice to be elevated now and into the future. And I believe it's never been more important for us to elevate learner voice in making all of these decisions as we look to the future.
I couldn't agree more. But what about community members? How can they have an impact in the traditional system?
So I encourage community members to look for districts that are hosting things that you might be able to give feedback with. Look when the superintendent's office hours are and go, dig in. I remind community members to come with a solutions-focused approach because I think there's such a mindset around community feedback and what communities have to say about districts or schools. Coming in with ideas and coming in with proposed solutions to a superintendent with the right approach, I know superintendents are ready to listen, especially with folks that are ready to roll up their sleeves and either bring resources or bring ideas or bring volunteerism into the work. And community members who can think about ways to invest in this transformation work, I think are definitely open and have more runway to get into a superintendent's office or into board office hours to provide some of those ideas for the district to be able to capitalize on and to have that support from the community.
As a closing thought, how important do you think it is for school districts to transform? And how important is it for them to hire an experienced facilitator such as Leap Innovations?
I think it's really important for systems to transform, not just for the sake of transforming, but transforming because there's a need to transform. I think having a transformation partner is really important to help school districts document, archive, guide, facilitate the transformation process, not only for today, but also scaling to other districts across the country so that we can create use cases for what folks are doing and to be able to share transformation examples. And then also to be able to really show the investment to a board and to a community and to a stakeholders that there's going to be some accountability in the transformation process, and being able to hold Leap or others accountable to that transformation process in partnership with the district and the school leader teams has been really powerful for the process to be followed through on and strategic and sustainable. So we've gotten a lot of feedback from the districts that we've done transformation work with to say, wow, we're so grateful that you're here. We're grateful for your frameworks. We're grateful for your infrastructure. We're grateful for the process. We're grateful for the access to talent across the nation that Leap can bring. But their appreciation for truly co-designing and setting the goals and the milestones and the grounding principles alongside them is really powerful.
Thank you, Scott. Nonprofits like Leap Innovations and Transcend Education are essential to addressing the education crisis. Before we end this chapter, listen closely for a special offer. Listeners of this podcast receive 20% off Dr. Reigeluth's book, Vision and Action, with the exclusive code VA20 when you order directly from solutiontree.com. This offer is only available for a limited time. Visit solutiontree.com to order your copy today. We are deeply grateful to everyone supporting our GoFundMe campaign, including Roberto Joseph, Fred O'Neill, Unak Beck, and Olga Morrill. The campaign is called Help End America's Education Crisis Now, and the link is in the show notes. Your generous contributions make it possible for us to keep this podcast available to all. Thanks so much to our guests, Dr. Reigeluth, Jeff Wetzler from Transcend Education, and Scott Fronheim from Leap Innovations. That's it for Chapter 10 of The Education Crisis, What It Is and How to Fix It. I'm Tembi Duncan, and remember, the future of education is in our hands.